Well, let me introduce you, and then
Do I?
let me introduce you.
Oh, okay.
So for the second part of today, I have the pleasure to actually introduce Anthony J. Tweller, or Tony Tweller, as a distinguished speaker in our guest speaker series here in the program. And I just want to highlight his career with just a few bullet points. I sent you last night the whole career. His full CV is multiple of pages long. So to give you just the highlights, Anthony Tweller is the owner and president of the Amaranth Company, a real estate development and investment advisory company. He has well-established national reputation that is based on over 40 years of successful accomplishments in executive marketing and financial management. Among other achievements and attainments have resulted in the completion of 15 master plan communities, 20 diverse development projects, and over 10,000 residential lots, totaling more than $1 billion in sales and several hundred millions of dollars in profits. Mr. Tweller founded the Amaranth Company in 1993. The Amaranth Company provides a broad variety of advisory services, from corporate strategic planning, due diligence studies, merger and acquisitions, project development, planning and management, financial planning and capitalization, human resource structure, and marketing strategies and programs. Previous career highlights of Tony Tweller include serving as the senior real estate executive of American Capital Corporation, or the South Florida division of the Pulte Home Corporation, or served for more than 12 years as the president and CEO of Mondex Incorporated, a diversified Florida developer. Mr. Tweller's professional affiliations include the Urban Land Institute, for which, in addition of being a frequent speaker and panelist, he is a former trustee and chairman of the Community Development Council, Greenflight, and former chairman and current member of the South Florida and Caribbean District Council's Advisory Committee. He is the former chairman of our advisory board for the Real Estate Development Program. And lastly, on a personal note, Mr. Tweller was born in New York City, has earned a BBA in accounting from Pace University, and after which he completed graduate studies at Adelphi University. I'm honored and blessed to have you here as my guest speaker. Tony wants to give us an overview on his experience and expertise on master plan communities. And knowing him, he will also give you career advice and insights of success and failures, mostly on the successes. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. And also, which I'm quite proud of, but I don't know if it's on there, I'm also a veteran of the United States Navy, which I was very proud to serve.
Thank you, sir.
We have some time, a couple hours here, and my most difficult problem was, what was I going to talk about? Because I can talk about a lot of different things to you. I have a very strong and warm feeling in my heart for all of you. I've been involved in NOVA's master's program now for 9 years. I was actually one of the people that started the program here. And so I've had so many rewarding moments with other students, and I've mentored 7 or 8 students. I currently have a mentee here, so I enjoy that. I want to just ramble around a little bit today. I want to talk about history to some degree of our industry, because I hope that opens up the most important thing I'd like to talk to you about, and that's the future. And so hopefully we're not going to get lost in the weeds. I'm not going to tell you how I developed all these different things and how lucky I was and all the stupid mistakes I made, and because there's plenty of all of that. But I want you, hopefully, to have some take-home value today. At the end of the day, that some of the things that I've said, I'll say and share with you will be memorialized in your mind and will be helpful to you in the future. I started in the real estate industry knowing nothing about real estate. I was a financial executive advisor working in consumer products, and was in a whole other side of the world, and certain things happened in my life, and all of a sudden I transported my very young family at that time to Miami and entered the real estate world, and I never looked back. I've had a lot of luck. I've had a lot of disappointing times. The one thing I can share with you is that there is absolutely no straight line to the top. I mean, I've never seen anybody get to the top on a straight line, and I don't expect any of you will. So the important thing is get on the train, see where it's going. If you're not happy where you're working, find a way to go find a job somewhere else. I'm really against people who waste their time in jobs that they know are going nowhere. It's painful, it's scary to pick up and leave and do other things, but you're the one that, you're responsible for yourself. I mean, you know, there's nobody else. As an expression I remember reading, the only person you spend your entire life with is yourself. So you're responsible for yourself. So there's no sour grapes and there's no anger and everything. You have to go make things happen for you in life. I want to start with a starting point of what I consider a dynamic moment in the history of the United States and real estate. And so I'm going to fly through a presentation here that it's sort of the history of master plan communities. And the term master plan communities takes in a lot of different design concepts. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, of how it changed over the years and how we got to where we are today. Before I do that, I'd like to ask anyone here, what do you believe is the American dream? Does anybody want to take a shot at answering that?
Success.
Excuse me?
Success.
Success? Okay. Anything else?
Opportunity.
When we talk about people coming to America or Americans achieving the American dream, what comes to mind?
Big house, a beautiful wife, and
Radio.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I'd say not so much the material things, but working hard and finding a career that you enjoy and get up every morning and are excited to do, and personally work to develop yourself and have a fulfilling career.
So a lot of fulfillment.
Yeah,
Correct.
and balance.
Okay.
Balance, right?
And balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you read that?
Don't forget the dog. She loves her voice.
I know you
Don't
can't
forget the
talk.
dog.
I can't read it. What does it say?
Don't forget the dog.
Oh, okay. So, at the end of World War II, around 1946, 1947, we had a phenomenal thing happen in the United States. And 13 or 14 million GIs or soldiers came home from war, and the country was avalanched with housing problems. Now, I want to keep in mind that prior to 1946, in the history of the United States, going all the way back to George Washington, America was a nation of renters. We rented. Less than 40% of Americans prior to that owned houses. Because why did they rent? Because Europeans rented. The history of Europe, almost across all of Europe, is these are countries of renting. So when World War II was over, and we had 13, 14 million soldiers and sailors coming home, there were no houses to rent. And so what happened is the government started putting up these things, temporary housing, they're called Quonset huts, And so this was like a real difficult social problem and economic problem in the country. But what they did do is they created what they called the GI Bill of Rights, which a lot of conservative people, politically conservative, don't want to admit was a colossal social program. And what we did was, oops, I'm sorry. We gave people, any soldier or sailor or anyone, a free college education, trade schools, and then also a low to no interest mortgage, 0 down payment mortgages, and an encouragement to leave the urban core, which what you're working on, and go to the suburbs. And so a man came along in 1947 by the name of William Levitt, and he created something called Levittown. And this is Levittown. This is the first major mass-produced housing on a mechanized basis in the history of the world. And this is the start of master planning commuting in America. And this was what was delivered to each site. They were building these houses 1 a day, 2 a day, and you bought this house $5,990, nothing down, and you got a 30-year, 1% mortgage, and you got a 2 or 3 bedroom house on a 1/4 acre of land, but you can see, not very exciting looking, but this was the start of the term, the American dream, because we created the daddy, the mommy, and the 2 kids. Daddy got all dressed up, got on his car and drove to work. Mommy stayed home with the kids, and this became the building block of how the shift in lifestyle and people living in America changed. And over the next 20 or 30 years, we went from 40% renting, 40% ownership, to we peaked in 2006 when we hit 70% ownership. Now, because of all the mistakes we made in 2006, we're not back down to 62% ownership right now, but we're still in the majority a nation of home ownership. And to a lot of people who come to this country or live in this country, if they make a list of what is the American dream, this is almost on everybody's list. Not the only thing, but owning a home. So there was, all of a sudden, there were countless Levittowns being built all over the country. And while that's going on, we realized that we didn't have any roads in America. We had a whole bunch of factories that we built in the war that were making tanks and airplanes that we converted over to producing trucks and automobiles. And so everybody wanted to buy an automobile now. We had all this building capacity, but at the same time, we didn't have any roads. So we had a president back in the 50s by the name of Dwight Eisenhower, who was a famous general in World War II, and he became president. And he said, we have to build a road network in this country. And he talked the Congress into creating the interstate highway system. And the interstate highway system just exploded in America. In the next 10 or 20 years, we just ran to the suburbs. I mean, we couldn't get out of the cities fast enough. And so now, it was out in the country where you got your American dream. The cities were being abandoned, they were decaying and so forth, but everything shifted to the suburbs. And in the 60s, the start of really big master plan communities. These are some names, you don't have to know them, but they're all over the country. These are huge projects. Weston is in Virginia, Irvine Ranch is in California, Mission Viejo's in California, Columbia is in Maryland, And these are very, very big communities, mostly housing. Mostly housing, because back in the day, it was not considered good planning to have jobs next to houses. So we separated everything. We had all the industrial over here, we had all the office over here, we had all the retail over here, and we had all the houses in these big bedroom communities. So the only way it all connected was you needed to have a car, and everybody had to drive in it, so this put more and more pressure on our roads and on our cars. Eventually, master plan communities started changing by adding resort lifestyles. We added golf courses, and we added marinas, and we got more and more sophisticated. And so the American dream wound up in suburbia. It accelerated urban decay. Environmental issues now became a part of the design process because we're running out now, we're tearing up wetlands, and we're chopping forests down, and we're doing everything. So now there were people starting to say, well, wait a minute, what are we doing to ourselves? But meanwhile, we started adding all these things: golf courses, gatehouses, sidewalks, landscaping, parks, lakes, greenbelts, and we got more and more complicated. And I don't know where you all live right now, but if you went to communities that you may know, like Weston in West Broward, it's a typical, very large master plan community. If you live in Palm Beach County, it's a community like Boca Point, which I built. Is 3,000, half a thousand acres, 18,000 housing units, and so forth. And so we kept growing. This created a trend of demographic profile changes. All of a sudden, to maintain this and to add to this, people realized that they needed more than one income in a house. So there was an explosion in the 60s and 70s of women going to work. And all of a sudden, people started planning their lives based on two incomes and not one income. And so the houses got bigger. And we started building second home communities and timeshares and everything because people had more disposable income. 2 automobiles instead of 1, and so forth. So things started, became very complicated, and we became burdened with all this debt. And now we're chasing something we don't even know as a society. We don't even know why we're chasing it, but we're chasing it. And meanwhile, there's millions of immigrants arriving to this country legally. They wanted a part of this, and so they jump on the bandwagon, and it complicates it even more. So we hit the wall in the 80s and the 90s. Master plan communities became unsustainable, but nobody really had any really answers. We just started saying we have to stop sprawling. We have to stop going out, killing all these green belts and everything. And so there were major debates started: growth, no growth, transportation, needs for transportation, education. All of a sudden, clean air and water became a big concern. All these things developed in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and in my opinion, were a spin-off of the collective idea of Bill Levitt into having these mass communities instead of urban cities like you guys worked on just now. So, sprawl now proclaimed as the root of all our problems. And new solutions came along, we'll call new urbanism or smart growth. People said we have to use mixed use, we need town centers, we need high density, we need urban renewal. And so a great battle began between government and developers, and that's the world you live in and I live in now, where a good professor here kept asking in the drill, what kind of resistance did you get? Because that's the part of the nature of our business, is the pushback and the resistance to development from the rest of the world. And it's not just housing. I mean, there's a pushback on everything constantly. You know, you've heard of NIMBYs, not in my backyard, and so forth. And so these great conflicts go on all the time. I just want to give you an idea in the history of this thing that it had a beginning, and this was the flow of how we got here on what the relationship between real estate development and regulations and government regulations and the hypocrisy of people who want everybody to have the American dream, but they don't want you to have it next to them. And so, as an anecdote story, I got a call a number of years ago from the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale. And they said, we're doing an article on gated communities, and are they really worth it, and are they worth the premium, and so forth. So now I had built a lot of gated communities in my life. I lived in one, and I still do. And so I decided to go out and do what I always did in my career. I went and did my own market research. I'm a fanatical nut over market research. I mean, maybe I'll try to get that into our conversation later today. But so I drove all over Boca and parts of Broward County and down in Dade County, and I made a list of all these things. And a lot of them had gates, others just had big berms with landscaping and you couldn't see inside them and everything. So I came to the conclusion that it wasn't security, because I spoke to the sheriff of Broward County and I spoke to policemen and a whole bunch of things, and I says, do these gates really work? And they said, no. They are a perception of safety, but in the end, if someone really wants to steal and get in your house, they're going to get in your house. It does keep a larger number away from you, but it's really not so ironclad that you are as safe inside a gated community as you are inside your locked house. So I said, innocently and stupidly in this newspaper article, that part of the reason people go and live and pay a premium to live here is because they want to say to people, I can afford to live here and you can't. Well, I can't tell you the phone calls I got. I mean, I had a woman on the phone. I mean, she was ranting and raging to me. How dare you treat me like this? How dare you think that I'm a snob and all this? And I knew just listening to her that that's exactly who she was. So, but anyway, so where are we? Okay, so we then recognized when we started peeling the onion that one of the reasons for this screwed up planning that we've done for 30 or 40 years is this segregated zone. That we deliberately put barriers and walls up that you force people to get in a car and drive 20 miles to go to work and 10 miles to go retailing or something. And then it finally dawned on people, why don't we just try to put all this together? Why are we killing ourselves here with, you know, we're trying to keep all these things separated. It's been a big mistake. Well, that's smart, and they're right, but of course, what do you think you wind up against? All of the diehards who believed in it in the first place said, well, what do you mean? You mean you're going to put office buildings down the street from where people live? Yeah, you know, and why can't people walk to work and everything? It's the way the old cities were. I mean, if you lived in Rome in 100 AD, everybody walked to everything, and there was 1 million people in Rome. So, so this became an issue, and so what it also developed in our research is that this segregated zoning created a world of haves and have-nots. That if you can afford to, buy this material package, you were one of the haves. The rest of the people were left on the wayside, and so we had these very obvious separations of people by wealth and money, and so we were seeing really all of the limitations of what we had created as this American dream. Because it actually was creating a lot of unaffordable housing because of how it was structured. So now there's a lot of new trends. Those of you who live in Boca, there's Meisner Park, which is a great example of a well-done mixed-use project because it has retail, it has residential, high density, it has restaurants, it has, by the way, the key word, I know you know it, but I'll just say, the key word for what all this is here, it's called placemaking. And today, you balance placemaking with your land use. And so, in addition to the office, residential, restaurants, retail, and so forth, you have this park, literally a lineal park in the middle of this community where people can sit on benches, they have music at night, they have dances, they have all kinds of things. So to me, even though Meisner Park is small, this is really very representative of smart development and land use and maximizing land use. So we now have this all over the country. There are thousands of Meisner Parks now. They don't solve all of our problems, but it's moved the needle. And so when you're in that planning commission someday with your own project, I mean, you probably had even in your project, in your town's project, you probably hear a lot of this dialogue that still floats around from the old to the new. These are some of the reasons this all came from. So just as a quick conclusion and overview of this, and I did this about 3 years ago, so forgive me. After World War II, there was an explosion of people in the United States. We went from 130 million people to 280 million people in 50 years. We're now gaining, and have been gaining, in the population of the United States, about 3 million people a year in and year out. And demographers say it's going to go on for at least another 20, 30 years. So that if those numbers are true, to show you what kind of an impact that would have, that means for every house standing today, we will have to build 1.5 more. And so when we're talking about, well, we don't want any more growth, we don't want any more, people living here, sheer social pressure and is gonna change, and people are gonna have to just recognize what's going on in America. This one always surprised me, and I've confirmed this a number of times, and by both the government, the federal government, and some independent universities. If you take all of the land of the United States and Alaska, our total population lives on and uses less than 5% of all our land. So when people talk about that we're running out of land, you gotta wonder where they're coming from. Because what they mean, of course, is quickly developable land. A lot of that land is not very developable in an easy sense. But if you get a map of the United States, I don't know how often you've flown from East Coast to the West Coast and you look out the window, and you fly for an hour or two and you see nothing, you know, 50-something%, I don't know the exact number, of all the land in the United States west of the Mississippi River is owned by us. The federal government owns over 50% of all the land west of the Mississippi. So when you fly for hours, you look out and you see all those mountains and prairies and deserts and of course cities and so forth. Most of that land, the majority of that land, is owned by the government. And regulations that have been passed over the years prevent us from going on our own land. I mean, I was just reading recently that Yellowstone Park, which is a carve-out, is so crowded that they're going to start taking reservations. You're going to go to one of those ticket companies online to buy a ticket to go into Yellowstone Park. And why? Because they won't allow us to go on any other of our land. So, I mean, I'm not trying to sound like a political, let's tear this country apart, but you got to wonder how we got to some of our thinking. And of course, Alaska's even worse. I mean, I know some people who live in Alaska. I know a developer in Alaska who does very well because he doesn't have much competition. But almost all of Alaska is out of reach from us. Okay, we just talked about some of the increases in the state. Some demographers believe that 50% of all the population growth for the next 20 or 30 years is going to be in 4 states in the Union. California, Texas, Florida, and Arizona. Knowing how these states work, I have developed in all of those states. Those are really, except for California, these are some of the easiest states to develop in the country. Now, Florida's tough, but it's tough in a good way because the rules in Florida are what they are. And if you go through the system and you get a piece of land approved for development, under our Constitution in the state, they can't change that zoning. They can't. You are what they call vested in zoning in the state of Florida. If you get the zoning approved in California, I guarantee you next day there will be 5 crazy groups showing up in a courthouse challenging your zoning because they don't have vesting. So that's why it takes 3 to 5 years to get a piece of land approved in California for development. Texas has almost no zoning. And you've heard that with the hurricane. Well, how did this all get so crazy in Houston? I did a lot of big projects in Houston over my career. And you can just throw a dart at a map and say, I'm going to develop there. And you just go develop there. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's Texas. You know, I was telling a friend that one of the things that always amazed me about Texas is that it's the second biggest state in the Union with population behind California. Millions and millions of people have moved to Texas and from all over the country. And the damnedest thing, within 2 years or 3 years, they're Texans. I don't know what happens to them, but all of a sudden, you wouldn't know where they originally came from. All of a sudden, they're wearing cowboy boots, and for real, and they consider themselves free Texans. And they could be from New York City, they could be from Los Angeles, they could be from Miami. They are the most, it doesn't happen here in Florida. You know, it takes a long time for people who move to Florida to say, I'm a Floridian. But in Texas, it seems to happen almost overnight. And of course, they have, like ours, like Florida, they have no state income tax. And they have very, very low sales tax. despite all of the conditions of development and how hard it is economically, Texas hardly felt any of the pain of 2008, 9, and 10. In fact, Houston and Dallas have been the strongest markets in the country for the last 7 or 8 years. And I was just reading a blog yesterday that in Houston, a survey of a bunch of realtors said that they almost can't recognize that they had that hurricane 4 or 5 weeks ago. That everything seems to be back totally to normal in the job market and everything. So if anybody's young and wants to go to somewhere else in this country and have a lot of fun in real estate, I'm a proponent of Texas, yeah.
Is there ability to bounce back due to the lack of regulation?
Yeah,
Really?
it's a big factor. I mean, there is no segregated zoning in all of Houston and most of Dallas. It just, there is, I mean, you gotta go in and get a project approved. It takes 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, and they have great aquifers so you can stick a pipe in the ground, go down about 600-700 feet and have all the water you need. You never hear of people talking about a water shortage in Texas.
Or water rights, or just like the discussion of water rights.
Yeah.
Legal right to water, which is Intermountain West, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, definitely Idaho. You have rights vested in company, in jurisdictions, and they can dictate, sorry guys, 10 miles upstream, we call our water rights. Stop agriculture. We need water for our companies. So huge water problems coming. So if you heard about the drought issues in Nevada and in California, think about you actually have the legal right to a specific amount of water to maintain your property, and you can call that on water upstream. And he said, say, miles out to other communities, my legal right is older than yours, give me my water.
Wow.
Well, the Colorado River is a great example of that. The states of Colorado and Arizona and California and northern Mexico actually have been at legal war for over 150 years, and they're still fighting over who has the right to put a straw in the Colorado River and suck water out of it. You probably know what I'm going to say now better than I do. In the Middle East,
Golden Heights.
in the Middle East here, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, one of the things that keeps a cover on how explosive that area is the recognition of limited water. That they all share limited water. But nobody talks about it because they all know that if they go too far, they can disrupt the water system to a point where they would have no water. So the water is a big issue. Arizona right now, yeah, I don't agree with this here myself because I know how limited future water availability is going to be in Arizona. Okay, I did this 2 or 3 years ago. And according back then, it says 50 million plus vehicles will be added to the highways and roads over the next 20 years. And 100 million will be added by 2050. Well, I've got to take that out of my presentation because I don't believe that anymore. Because we're going to talk about in a little while here the effect of autonomous cars on real estate. And boy, are you guys in for a change. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, one of the things that we had going for us back to the 50s and 60s and 70s is we had a whole bunch of very visionary people show up. I mentioned Bill Levitt, but there was a whole bunch of other people that built these big communities and changed the dynamics of things and everything. And had a big impact, huge impact, on the direction and the intensity of all this development. we don't have anybody around like that right now. I mean, I've been so close to the real estate industry for over 40 years. I've been in the leadership of the Urban Land Institute for over 30 years. I mean, I got great insight into this industry. There are a lot of good developers. There's a lot of bright people in the management. There's nobody like a Bill Levitt around right now. There's nobody, I think, right now that can create a tipping point, because that's what all problems need eventually is a tipping point. And we're kind of like on hold right now, and I don't think it's limited to real estate. I think it goes right into our government, it goes right into corporate America. I mean, you can count on one hand people that are extremely admired and looked to for guidance and visioning and so forth. There doesn't seem to be many people around like that. That was not the case back in those decades. So I was telling my wife that we were in Italy on vacation. She said, "Well, why don't you just use the Renaissance as an example, that all of a sudden you had the dark ages of Europe, and then all of a sudden there was this explosion in Italy of 200, 250 years of, and 300 years of not only art and everything, but then music that spread to Germany and everything. And so for like 300 or 400 years, there was an explosion of creativity and so forth. I don't think the only place things like that are happening now are in Silicon Valley, that you would say there's a great movement taking place. So, let me see if these people had impact on society. They all were visionary, and they all operated in the fishbowl. What I mean by that is, they didn't care who was attacking them and everything. I mean, I read a lot of their biographies and everything. They were people with guts and courage, and were willing to take deep risks. And so, okay, so I want you to hope that worked as a basis for where we are today. And, you know, where did all these structure of government and real estate and so forth, this was just the tip of the iceberg of things that affected us in real estate. I look at each of you with high hopes that you all, in one fashion or another, are the future leaders of the real estate industry. I mean, that's why you're here. I think I know why you're here. I mean, I don't know precisely why you're here, but as a group, you're hardworking as a rule. You want more out of life, not only money. You want to be engaged in life. You want to participate. You want to be part of the solution. You want to be respected, and you want to have an edge over the next person. And so you're willing to make this extreme sacrifice of financial and time to accomplish this. And I admire you for that, and tell you that, as I've told many students, when they stamp that MSRED after your name, no one could ever take that away from you. You carry that for the rest of your life. In a way, I was like that woman. I said, you have it and they don't, okay? So when you get discouraged and you want to mail it in, just hang in there, because it's all going to be worth it. Sorry you got to borrow so much money to do this, but but it's going to be worth it. I mean, I have high confidence in that. This program has gotten better and better every year. I mean, when we started this 8, 9 years ago, we couldn't get 5 students. because we were starting from scratch. I mean, and we just had some very dedicated people in the industry that stuck with it and convinced the school to keep trying to expand this. And now we have classes the size of this. We have higher requirements to get in. Back in those days, if you had a 2.5, you were in, because we had no choice. Today, you can't get in this program with a 2.5. So, and oh, by the way, I will share with you, because allow me to pat myself once in a while. I went through undergraduate school and graduate school totally at night. I never attended one day of day college or higher education in my life. I don't know how I did it. I don't know what drove me, but I went to school 4 nights a week for 6 years. And so if there's any feeling for you, I want you to know some of it comes from my own path in life. And, but I think now about it, and I say, I could never find that energy again to do that, but I apparently had the right motivation. Let's change subjects on a couple of things. Let's talk about the future. And I mean, I'm talking real estate future. I can't and you can't. We're not going to sit here today and solve all the problems of the world. There are a lot of things that are out there that we just don't have any control over. And whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I mean, God forbid somebody's going to press the wrong button, or somebody's going to throw too many grenades in the room, or who knows. But we still stay optimistic, and we still stay energized, and we stay resilient, and we keep bouncing back, and that's the important thing. One of the things that I'm most fascinated with today, among many things, I mean, is autonomous automobiles and trucks. And let me see if I can find this. I'm not good at this stuff, so.
It is good.
Hold on. I got it. Thomas, help.
Thomas is coming.
I can't get back to my,
Where do you want to go?
I want to go into another file. Great.
Which one do you want?
Let's see. Can we turn that around?
No.
Okay. Oh, I can do that. Okay.
This one?
Yeah. I ran across a good friend of mine by the name of John Burns. You see his name on the bottom here somewhere. The smartest, honest, and straightforward market researcher in the whole country. I say that because he's a friend, but I say it more so because I respect his work so much. So anything that John Burns and his people do, you can take to the bank most of the times. I mean, if you're going to need it at a high level of market research and visioning, John is great. But John is expensive, but John is great. But you know, how expensive is a matter of how much risk you're taking in your project and how much you're risking. So I thought this was a great summary of 8 big housing changes thanks to driverless cars. And what they wrote down here are, or what they came up with, well, what's going to really happen? Well, he says, number one, prime real estate will be unlocked for new construction. We will not need parking lots. We will not need, shopping centers will not need huge parking lots. we'll need about 10% of what we've got right now. Auto dealerships, there will be none. In 10 to 15 years, most of the automobiles in the world will be owned by Google, Amazon, and Apple. And the only time you're going to get in a car, which will be a driverless car, is when you pick up the phone like you do now with Uber, and you'll get transportation when you need transportation, and that'll be a way of life. And if you think this is you don't understand that this is like right around the corner, you need a wake-up call. I mean, General Motors just spent another $4 billion last week on another level of software. These guys are going at supersonic speed right now to make all this happen.
So GM invested in
Excuse
this.
me?
GM just invested in this.
Yes. Oh, they've been investing for 4 years
They're the
now.
biggest, actually.
Dyson, which is famous for its vacuum cleaners, was like 2 or 3 weeks ago announcing that they're doing it to electric cars, not autonomous, but electric.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the electric power to that.
Well, in addition to be driverless, they'll be electric. So, okay, so all of a sudden, well, right now, in the automobile retail business, there's over 4 million people working. These are people working in automobile dealerships, auto insurance companies. Just you won't need auto insurance. So huge industries are going to go away. But in terms of real estate, gas stations, you won't need gas stations. Like one of the things, a client of mine, a number of years ago, one of his financial guys came to me and said that he had an offer from, I think, Ford Motor Company to go work in their real estate department. And he asked me, he said, why would I work in the real estate department of Ford Motor Company? Because I told him, I said, because they have about 3,000 people in their real estate department because they own tens of thousands of acres of land all over the United States. I mean, so when you're thinking about, well, where can I go work in the real estate business, we automatically always think of, well, I'm going to be a developer. Well, developers represent like 1% of all the people that work in the real estate industry. It's all this and then I told Professor, Dr. Wirtz, that we're going to do a presentation in the future on all the different things you can do with a real estate education like you're getting. And it's really surprising to a lot of the students that so many different diverse opportunities exist. So, next one here. People driving, this was you drive until you qualify for a mortgage. He's claiming here that once people are not going to have an expense of their car and will be paying for transportation just as needed, that there'll be an inclination to not be discouraged about traveling too far from where you work. Now, that's kind of hard thing to get your head around, but it's just that. Oh, I know it. Does everybody own a car here? I mean, does anybody not own a car here? Okay. I'm going to say you spent $40,000 for your car. Maybe you spent 30, maybe you spent 50. I don't know. Think about how many hours you actually spend in your car a day. 2 hours, 3 hours, an hour and a half? If you have a second car in your household, that one probably gets less than an hour a day. It's the worst investment you can make. Think about it as an investment and the return on your investment. Instead of using money and spend it when you need it and only when you need it. Imagine not having car payments and insurance payments. How your life will change. And not that you're not going to pay for transportation, but it's going to be on a wholesale. I mean, I spoke to a guy personally from Google last year, and I had an engagement out in Silicon Valley. They feel they're going to own, by 2021 or 2, 100 million cars in the world. Google. They're planning on owning 100 million cars. Now, 100 million cars in the whole world is not a very gigantic number, but that's just one company. They're so sure that this is where these things are going. Urban employment should rise as prime real estate is repurchased for housing. In other words, as we tear down the car dealership in the middle, that's right in the middle of a great highway or next to the interstate or wherever, it's going to be used for housing. It's going to be used for retail. It's going to be all those car dealerships that get torn down. All these parking lots. I mean, I know guys at Simon, which is the big shopping center. They've been working on what they're going to do with their parking lots now for about 5 years. They have thousands and thousands of acres of parking lots that they're not going to need. You're going to want to go to the shopping center, you're going to pick up the phone, car's going to come pick you up, take you to the shopping center, and then when you go home, you're going to pick up just like you do with Uber, and another driverless car is going to come along and pick you up and take you home. I mean, Mercedes, last year at the auto show in Paris, had 3 models of driverless cars, each one with 4 or 6 seats facing each other with no steering wheel. Now that got to be spooky, getting in a car with no steering wheel. I saw a demonstration a friend had. He's working on a special commission set up by the governor of the state of Florida. The governor of the state of Florida wants to know how this is going to affect the highways of the state. Because we don't need highways the way they are now. They've got computer designs right now. The cars are going to be going 70, 80 miles an hour and only 2 feet of distance between each other. There will be no accidents. I mean, there'll be one in 10,000 to be an accident. So we're not going to lose 40,000 people a year in car accidents. And I saw a demonstration. It was like 20 cars lined up at a red light, and the light turned green, and all 20 cars started moving instantaneously at the same time. Just think the impact on traffic and why we have traffic. I mean, it's really exciting stuff.
But let me inject the one thought. So if we have that, we're playing with HOV lanes, highly occupied or high occupancy vehicles to give them, if you carpool, give you special rides to be faster in traffic. With the driverless car, the way this lays out right now is we will have dedicated driverless routes, so we have individual cars, and so why are we going after the driverless car because it's so individual versus pushing more into, let's say, public transportation and say, you know what, you can call your driverless car, it's there in 5 minutes, but there's also a standard bus route or trail route or whatever vehicle will be used then to say, in every 15 minutes, if you walk 2 blocks down the street, every 15 minutes there's a standard trip generator for you, you hop on the bus.
No, it's a great point, but here's where I think how we answer that. If you wanted to build a transportation system right now, I was working on a big project in Santa Barbara County a number of years ago, and this was in the suburbs of Santa Maria, California, which is part of Santa Barbara County. And we came up with a light rail transportation system from our project downtown Santa Maria, then back and so forth. We had experts come in and did a workup. Well, what would it take? cost-wise, regulation-wise. Their estimate was that we would not get the first car running for 22 years in the state of California. So the autonomous car guys are saying right now, if we lock horns with those people, we're never going to get anything done. Maybe once we get our cars going, that'll wake them up and say, you know, let's have autonomous, you know, transportation. There's a joke that went around, and I don't know how true it is, it's an anecdote, but the president of FedEx was asked a year or two ago, are you going to have pilotless airplanes? Because 90% of all airplanes today literally fly without the pilot anyway. He says, we're going to have in the future, in the cockpit, a pilot and a dog. So they asked him, why the dog? He says, if the pilot touches the control, the dog's going to bite him. So it was a joke, but it was you know, a signal. Now, the first thing that's going to happen, and you're absolutely right, because we don't have the lanes in it, is semi-overland, high-speed trailers will be the first autonomous driverless trucks on the highway. They will go from one depot to another depot. They will not be able to meander through regular streets and everything.
We have drone taxis right now. Like,
Say what?
We have drone taxis actually in Dubai that takes you from the airport.
Mhm.
There's no pilot, there's nothing. You just get in the airport, you get in the thing, and it flies you to your destination with
Yeah.
no pilot or anything like that, but it's a drone.
Sure. There's so many different things that are almost there, you know?
You fly to your house.
Let's see what else here.
Can I make a comment, sort of piggybacking off what Dr. Wars said about public transportation and infrastructure, what have you? I've read that when we introduce these autonomous cars, that basically we're going to have a 90% increase in cars on the road, and that's sort of, so doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose? Are we trying to
Well,
cut down on
yes.
the cars and
Yes,
traffic
but-
infrastructure and?
But if you eliminate the things that delay normal traffic today, and you put 6 or 8 lanes where there are 4 today, because the safety factor of getting close, there's all these other different factors that they consider in this thing. And so some of that has to be proven yet. I mean, this is obviously, a lot of this is very hypothetical. But I don't think it's beyond just pure hypothetical. It's racing to reality. And what I'm going to say is, for that reason, it's going to impact your real estate life. I mean, let's talk about homes. I think they talk about it here. No garages. You won't need garages. So just think how land planning will change for residential construction, where you won't need this 400 square feet to 500 square feet space for a 2-car garage. Yeah.
That will change and not change. Because the primary car might not be there anymore, but the fun car and the recreational opportunities are there. I used to live in a state where I took the large house, we actually had 3 garages, but maybe just 1, maybe a second car. The 3rd garage spot was the kayak, the RE, the ATV for your outdoors activities. So there might be, that statement might be just low.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, you can't do this in one generation, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not going to, if I have a Corvette right now, I don't, but I used to, I'm not going to give that up.
But you did.
I don't see a driverless Corvette, you know what I mean? So, elderly people who have to give up their cars because they can't drive anymore, are forced then to leave their home and go live generally in some kind of facility or something, because that's the only way they can get some kind of transportation on a reliable basis. With this kind of a system, they can stay in place in their homes. And so this could have a major impact on the wellness industry and the assisted living industry, which, just to digress for a second, when the students have asked me over the years, what would you do in real estate if you were just starting out? And I say, I would focus on two sectors of real estate, and I still feel this way. One is redevelopment. We're gonna tear everything down and we're gonna rebuild something better. And if you wanna see that, you're standing right in the center of gravity of that, Broward County. Because there is no more land left in Broward County. And so you're gonna see, once we fill in the 10 acres here and the 12 acres here and all these kind of things, that'll always go on. We're gonna start looking at serious teardowns of major whole communities, and this is how cities grow historically around the world. And if Broward County has 1,800,000 people today, and they said it's going to be 2,500,000 people in the next 10 years, the next 12 years, well, there's no land for that under the current paradigm. So we're going to have to redevelop many things, and maybe some of that parking lot from the shopping center is going to work, and so forth. So you got all these shifts. I mean, you're the one that's got to think this way. You're the next tipping points. If you try to go back or come in this business and look at what Tony Trella did over the last 20, 30 years and say, well, look, he was successful doing that, and copy what I did, you'd be a disaster. But what I did wouldn't work anymore. I mean, I spent half my development life without a cell phone. Think about it. I mean, there were no phones. There were no faxes. I mean, you actually had to go see somebody. I mean, when I was running a company called Marco, and I had projects all over North America, I used to have set times like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, where my general managers can find me and get me on the phone to tell me what's going on. I mean, that was the world we lived in. Obviously, that wouldn't work today. I'll never forget when the first fax came along, and in the old days, if you were negotiating a deal and somebody sent you a change to the contract, you'd say, all right, look, let me think about it, I'll make a change and I'll drop it in the mail and you'll get it in a day or two. So then FedEx came along or something and said, no, we can deliver that to them first thing in the morning. And then very cheap, quick fax machines came along, and of course then ultimately attachments on emails, but you didn't have time anymore. Somebody says on the other side, well, you don't have to wait. Look, I'll just fax it to you, take a look at it, and make up your mind right now. So the whole decision-making process changed, and we didn't even realize how and change is tough for human beings. We hate change. So repair and remodel will flourish. The senior citizens staying in their homes. Now remember, we're talking tens of millions of people who will change their senior life and so forth because of their ability now to be transported much easier. And so I thought this was it's not the whole answer to everything, but it kind of gets you thinking. And that's what hopefully we can put into your mind. Think, challenge everything. Let me show you something else. Okay.
I remember that.
Profile view? No.
Go to the bottom, last magnifying glass.
Oh, hold on.
left, on your left.
On the left?
It's the magnifying glass on the left.
Other left,
Other way.
other left. No, that's it. Other left.
I'm not in the right place.
Thank you, Cash, yeah.
Oh, that thing? Okay. Now, you were all too young for this. Okay. This is how we watch television. This was the only way you could watch television. And by the way, there were like 3 or 4 channels. So when you looked across the landscape of America, I don't care whether it was cheap housing or multifamily or whatever, this is what you looked at. And because this was the way. Now, if you imagine telling somebody here that in 10 years or 20 years, all of these antennas, the millions and millions of them, will be torn down and you'll be connected with a cable. And so the person who was in this business and didn't understand that this was not sustainable, something has to be coming along in the future. So let me go to something else. I want you to think.
You gotta click on the allow block content. Click on the button on the bottom.
Internet restricted this webpage. What? I just had it open. This here?
Yes.
Oh. Ah, okay. Now, solar panels. Everybody wants us to have solar panels now. We're putting solar panels all over the place, right? And it makes the house look like. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. I'm nervous here. So, I'm sorry, guys. Too quick here. You fix it. Here's the point I want to make.
Is this what you want?
Okay, yeah, that's enough. Because I'm just trying to make a point. Thanks. Okay, I'm a builder. I'm an ex-builder. I look at this picture and I say, okay, here's a very expensive house where the minimum design required was expensive S-tiles, concrete tiles, and this guy puts up these solar panels, takes away the whole beauty of the tile roof, and this one and this one and this one. Now, 20 years from now, or 25 years from now, tile's got to be replaced, and what do you have to do? You have to dismantle this entire solar panel system to get to the roof. Yeah.
They actually, Tesla has created tiles that looks the same thing and it's solar. So you put it on the roof as it is, so it's not solar panels anymore. It's actually just like the way it is.
You mean the tile itself?
The tile itself, it's a solar thing and they put it on the thing. Tesla has it actually.
Well, see, thank you, you're helping me out. What I'm saying is, ready, something coming along.
Correct.
And so I visualize sometime before the new thing comes along, millions of American homes and buildings with all these ugly solar panels, a whole industry, and then all of a sudden they figure out how to make electricity with a pill or or something, or we have a new way of harnessing energy or something. This is not going to last forever. Now, where does that put you guys? You're in a world that's telling you to put solar panels on everything. You may not have any choice. But I would be like you, where you're aware of a substitute for this already, going another direction with this, just like those TV antennas and everything. And oh, by the way, the cable that replaced those TV antennas is on its way out. I mean, we're cutting the cable, or whatever you call the term. My wife and I have 2 Apple streaming things, and it's like a whole new world, you know? And my wife said, why do we spend all that money with AT&T? And she said, we don't watch 90% of what we're paying for, and here we can just stream whatever we want to watch. It's got to be cheaper. I mean, I don't know, I didn't put pencil or paper on this thing, but maybe you guys can help me out on that. But, so even the replacement of the thing that replaced the antenna is on its way. I only bring up these things to illustrate how the next successful person in business in your world is going to be somebody out there on the cutting edge, outside the box, challenging what's there, and finding a newer and better and more efficient way to do it. And we have all these examples in our lives of how things keep changing. And so I just use that as an illustration. Now I want to show you something. I hope it impresses you as much as it impressed me.
That's the video.
Yeah.
Go back to the browser.
Go back to the browser.
Yeah, if that's the YouTube piece you want to do.
Oh, this is the one that we went to, we want to,
Go to YouTube.
that one.
Because that's just a file. That's good.
Oh, yeah, there it is. No, it's just music. I'm not going to run the whole thing. Okay. This is a house being made with a 3D printer.
They make it with 10 now too.
And of course, obviously, it's just a graphic, but
They started this.
this house, there are experiments going on now. We're entirely building a house in 48 to 72 hours with 3D printers. And I'm not just talking about walls and everything. I'm talking about with total cutouts, conduits, door frames, everything.
And it's hurricane proof, fireproof, everything proof.
Everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the software developer, he can design 1,000 different houses. I mean, you can go in and order a house in the future, and you can design it down to the most specific tastes, because it just will be a matter of developing a software. In Italy, there's a company with a 3D printer that's 3 stories high, and is producing a rectangular retail box every 24 hours
Where's that?
in Italy. And so this is the kind of things, it's not just going to be a house, it's going to be tomorrow's public shopping center. I mean, it's going to be anything. GE took their engine that pushes the American Airlines Dreamliner airplane. They have now duplicated every single one of the 60,000 parts in the jet engine on a 3D printer. They're saying in the future they will no longer have to count on suppliers from all over the world. They'll be able to reproduce whatever parts they need on a 3D printer right in their own warehouse. So think about, I mean, I know it's hard. It's just, this is your generation, so. I told the last class when I was doing this, I said to them, you know, I'm really, excuse my language, I'm really pissed off. And so one of the students asked me, why? I said, because I'm not gonna be here to enjoy all this stuff. And you guys are. I mean, I don't know what my granddaughters are gonna be, what kind of world they're gonna have, but it's so exciting to me. Artificial intelligence. James Diamond, the CEO of Chase, says that in 3 years, Chase will let go of 30% of all their employees. 30%. Hundreds of thousands of employees, because of artificial intelligence, will be able to do the work they do. Now, this sounds horrifying to people, like, oh my God, what's going to happen to the world if all these people keep getting laid off? Well, I say what we're going through is similar to the Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, if you were in Europe, say, in the year 1700, you never went more than 20 miles from your village. You had no idea what was in the world. So what happened was 90% of all the people in 1700, 1750 worked on a farm. They were in agriculture. Okay, I just wanted to make a point. It takes about 25 minutes to build a house. I don't know what, but to finish the point. So people, 90% of people worked on a farm. 10% worked in little villages, and like your little core city that you're recreating. In the Industrial Revolution, the whole thing flip-flopped. 80 or 90% of the people wound up working in the city in factories, and only 10 or 20% of the people stayed on the farm. Mankind has the ability to be resilient, and we don't know what changes are going to come as a result of all this in a positive way. There's going to be jobs and created that we have no idea what they are. I went to a futuristic seminar a number of years ago, and they were talking about what will it be like to live to 120 or 130 years old. Now, maybe my granddaughters are going to live that old, I don't know, or their kids, I don't know. But then we started telling jokes about it, like, would you stay married to somebody for 100 years? I mean, what's going to happen to society when you live that long?
You told your wife that's true.
Yeah, no, my wife and I, she's a great sport. She laughs, but you're going to have one job for 80 years? No, I mean, so it's going to be very common for people to have 2 or 3 careers. I mean, I'm fortunate, personally. I spent half my life in the development world, and I spent the second half of my working life as a consultant. I've had 2 different lives completely. Now, granted, they were connected and they fed off each other, but in one day, I had 1,000 employees, and the next day, there was just me. And that was pretty dramatic. I didn't know that's what was going to happen when I left the big corporate world. But I never forget that. A friend of mine in California, a big developer, called me and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Why don't you come out here and take a look at my company and see if you can help me?" So I did that and spent a couple of days with him and gave him some ideas. So he asked me to write a report. So I came home and I said to my wife, I said, "I guess I'm a consultant." And so I said, "I need things." So she said, "What do you mean you need things?" I said, "Well, I need a stapler and I need clips and paper." You know, I had nothing. So she said, "Well, let's go to Office Depot." And I said, "Well, what's Office Depot?" So we went to Office Depot and I walked in Now remember, I'm president of a big company for years, right? So I walk into Office Depot and I said, oh, this is where they came to buy all this stuff. Because I always just walked down the hall into the supply room and took whatever I wanted. So it was just one of those changing moments for me. I have one other subject matter quickly here, is I mentioned before, which is health and wellness. And what is health and wellness? Well, health and wellness is obviously or will be becoming one of the biggest industries in not only the United States but in the world. It's not only hospitals and everything, but it's taking care of people who are handicapped or have limited facilities and so forth. Now, John Burns says that maybe they're not going to need all these facilities, but I'm telling you that we're going to have to build more and more facilities for older people who are going to live longer, are being kept alive by medicine and surgery and so forth. So we're going to need more hospitals, we're going to need more medical buildings. I mean, I have a client in Tucson. He has a big master plan community, and he has sold about 7,000 or 8,000 lots to builders, but he's made more money for the 80 acres that he carved out for health and wellness facilities than he did in the whole rest of the community. Because he's got a 300-bed hospital was built, and about 7 or 8 major support medical buildings were built, and he had almost a zero land basis, and they were just extremely profitable to build when he built them. Right now he's sitting on 4,000 developed lots that he can't sell, and he's like bleeding to death on his balance sheet because every day that goes by, the discounted value of those lots gets less and less. That's one of the risks of taking when you put so much money up front to save money, and then the market turns on you and you're stuck with them because the market, the builders, aren't ready to buy lots right now. And so this is a high risk, high reward industry, and he's a great example of that. So, okay, I think this is a good place for me to stop. How about any questions? Yeah.
You said if you were to get to advise new investors.
I don't hear too well, so let me come over here.
Okay. Don't speak too loudly. But you said if you were to advise new developers.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't give you number 2.
Yes.
Oh.
What was number 2?
Yes, I did. Redevelopment.
Yes.
And health and wellness.
That was my question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Health and wellness,
Yeah.
number 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think of all these sports complexes that are shaping up in the United States? Because now a lot of families are paying 6 figures for their 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds to play 2 weeks baseball. The private thing, they're doing this in Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. There's soccer fields everywhere. There's sports complex. It's like the most kind of like demand, the highest demand right now in the market is for sports complex. What do you think of those? Have you heard anything like that, or have you heard the buzz about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I know people have dedicated land for those purposes, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You know, is it a fad or not? I think it takes a generation to find out. You'll notice that everything is generationally tested in life. In other words, kids, let's say one generation of kids love a certain kind of toys and so forth, and then another next generation comes and they either adapt it and like it and keep it and sustain it, or they say, I don't want any part of that. So if you were building the first round, you got to keep your fingers crossed that the next generation is going to be interested in the product. Back in the 1980s, Encyclopedia Britannica. Are you all familiar with that is?
Yeah.
You know, it's the old, you don't know? It's okay.
It used to be like this.
It's a
big.
set of books, about 15 or 18
Now it's all
books,
Google.
that has every fact in the world, okay? It's like, it's the cloud of books.
Jordan, our salesman, used to sell
Yeah,
them
it's
too,
a-
I remember that.
And it was every parent's obligation to find a way to buy their children a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And they actually had payment plans of 10 cents a week,
They would find these
25
books.
cents a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're huge
because
set.
it's not just one big book about you look up things. It's like
It's a whole shelf of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like being in a law office, you know, when there's all the books?
more than that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I still have.
And they came out with
Huh?
new
Also announced that
editions.
they-
Yeah.
Well,
So weird.
They announced that they're going
Oh my
to
God.
something.
I'm old.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you what really
It's
happened.
5 years, I think.
I'm gonna tell you what really happened. It's a true story. In fact, they're teaching this in graduate school, most of the B schools. In the 80s or early 90s, they were at their peak. Their life was never so good. And the board of directors was having a meeting, and one of the directors had this young guy come in with one of the first IBM personal computers, which was, you know, a joke. But, you know, and everybody told IBM, you're wasting your time. People aren't going to bother with computers. And so he makes a presentation. He takes out a floppy disk and he puts it in there. And he starts showing them book by, page by page by page. And of course, he would have needed maybe about 50 floppy disks. I don't know how many to do the whole thing. And he said, I can put all your books on a set of these floppy disks. And it would cost you like 1/10 of whatever you're paying now. And they said, oh, no, nothing will ever replace these books. This is an heirloom. If this goes, this is like pride in the family to have this. But you realize that 5 or 10 years later, half the information in these books was old news. Well, they turned them down. They filed bankruptcy 6 years later. And they've been floundering around and everything, but they hardly print it all anymore. They have some other subsidiary companies now or something. But see, that's somebody, group of people who weren't thinking.
Mr. Huizinga. Wasn't he the owner of Blockbuster Videos?
Owner of what?
Mr. Huizinga.
Yeah.
He could have done the whole Netflix thing way before anyone else, but he thought it was wrong too. He thought old-fashioned and he left behind.
Yeah, but look at the money he made on Blockbuster.
He has Alzheimer's. He has Alzheimer's now, so he doesn't know. He has Alzheimer's. He doesn't know which money he has.
He sold it at the
You know,
peak.
he wound up
sold
only
it at the
paying,
peak.
he
He's
wound
fine.
up paying only $10 million for Blockbuster
And he sold it
and
at
all
the
the rights to it. And that was a 10-year ride that was unbelievable. But anybody could have seen that had an end coming. That was not sustainable.
Yeah, that was
you
a
know.
rocket science.
But
Will that same thing happen with homes if the 3D models come up? Would that same thing happen with like old houses, like CBS homes and stuff? Is that same thing
well, I don't know. Maybe they'll come down the street with this gigantic machine on wheels and they'll drive it over the house and they'll remake that. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like
manufacturer.
But new construction, definitely.
the chip and processing books, like the same machines.
Yeah.
So in your first presentation, you mentioned the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
Everything with technology you're presenting as well. I mean, in your opinion, from what I see, obviously the gap between the have and have-nots is getting increasingly bigger. It's happening year over year. So with, you bring technology in, for example, with autonomous cars, let's say you dedicate highways for those, a whole new infrastructure system, which will obviously spur development for that as well, brand new homes to support that. That increases the gap even further. So, in your opinion, how would you solve that?
Well, we are in an area now in South Florida where the have and have-nots has become a crisis. We're now in the same category as New York and San Francisco. We're put in that category now, where it's almost impossible for young people or poorer people to survive in Miami-Dade County and most of Broward County and West Palm Beach County. And here again, we're downtown Miami. The average tenant is spending like 40% of their income on rent.
If not more.
Hmm?
If not
more. I mean, this is not sustainable. And there's a major crisis, there's not a crisis,